Hello, property investors. Welcome back to another session of our facilities management and utilities management. So today, because we're going into the beginning of winter, I thought it quite a good idea to go back to the idea of maintenance. And the reason for that is when we go into winter, it's a great opportunity to take advantage of the drier weather. In South Africa, it tends to be there tends to be no rain during winter, or less rain during winter. So it's the drier period. It's a good opportunity to get on top of the stuff that the rain generally slows you down with. So for me, there's two sides of it. So the most important thing is to go through it from the top to the bottom of your property. But before you get there, you need to look at the accounting side of things, so the budgeting side of things. So yes, you need to start from the top of the property to the bottom, but you can't do anything until you've got the budgeting right. So for me, it's so important from the moment you start looking into becoming a property investor, you start thinking around the idea of maintenance budgets. So the way that we think of it is generally a case of whatever your gross rental is, you should be setting aside 10% of that rental to be accumulating to go towards your maintenance tasks. So that's a starting point, but you need to also go a little bit deeper than that. So that 10% should cover any sort of roller coaster ups and downs types of maintenance. You're putting that aside into a separate savings account, so it's ready to be able to use for your maintenance activities. The other side to it is you actually need to physically plan what kind of maintenance you're going to do throughout the life cycle of the property. So things like paint needs to be refreshed every 5 to 10 years. So safe average is about 7 years on that. You're looking at upgrading your landscape. You're looking at those kind of aesthetical upgrades that you need to budget through. And then there'll be major repairs that need to happen, be roof repairs. Sometimes some of the roof timbers will end up rotting, or there might be borer damage, that sort of thing. So you need to start thinking of those bigger expenses or capital expenses. And you need to factor that into the budget and budget towards those expenses. So as an example, on the paint, every 7 years, you need to repaint the whole building, get an average cost of what it would cost to, or get a quote of what it would cost to paint your whole building, and then factor that budget in. So as you know, in 7 years' time, it's got the inflation related value, and that's what you're budgeting towards. There's no excuse to get to that 7th year and go like, oh, where am I going to find the money? You should be planning that in your numbers throughout the journey of property. We're not sort of trying to hope for some luck to get to these things. So budget that way. Another big one that I really suggest people have as an emergency budget is if you've got multiple properties, you need to at least have the cost of replacing one geyser as a sort of emergency budget. And the reason for that is if in one of your properties a geyser bursts, you need to quickly be able to replace that geyser, get a new geyser in so as your tenants have hot water. It's a huge inconvenience if you have to wait for the insurance to come out and assess and replace that geyser. The insurance companies are a lot better nowadays around the guarantees on your geyser. They've got their technicians lined up, and they generally get to your property within 24 hours. But you do have a bit of scope to say, hey, listen, I need this geyser replaced straight away. On the weekend, you haven't been able to get hold of your insurance company. You need to get that your local or your power team plumber to come in and replace that geyser ASAP. So that looks at those budget elements. Now I talk about the idea of starting from the top to the bottom. For me, the reason that's so important is because water causes the most damage on our properties. So if water is able to get into your property through the roof, through the gutters, through the windows, through the paving, causing damp issues, causing water leak issues, damaging ceilings, it's so much more expensive to do those repairs than it is to do the preventative maintenance. So for me, how do you prevent water getting into the property? Is you need to do this kind of maintenance. So things like your roof itself, check that the waterproofing is still intact. Make sure that the tiles aren't cracked. So whether tree branches have fallen on the tiles, whether you've had technicians on the roof over the course of the year who have stepped on tiles and cracked tiles. Sometimes the UV damage to the waterproofing takes a bit of a toll, so you need to just update or do a fresh coat of waterproofing paint over any membrane, that sort of thing. So now's the perfect time to do that, because it's easier to allocate time and not worry about whether it's going to rain consistently. So plan to get your waterproofing done. Then coming down the roof, look at the gutters. It's now winter, all the leaves are shedding, all the trees are shedding leaves. So you're getting these leaves building up in the gutters. Have those gutters cleared now, especially at the beginning of winter, definitely at the end of winter, in case there's been an extra build-up. So at least you know when you're going into summer and the rainy months, there's no possibility of gutters being blocked, downpipes being blocked, and you're having to then spend a bit more to unblock those downpipes. So do the maintenance now. On the roof as well, it's also a good idea if you've got tiled roofs to get them power washed every couple of years. And the idea there is you're preventing the buildup of dust, the buildup of any moss or any of that sort of thing. And the reason for that is because your tiles sort of overlap each other. And if there's a buildup underneath the tile, that allows like a wicking action for water to sort of slowly creep up underneath the tile and then drip into the ceilings. So you need to get rid of any of that residue that's sitting on the roofs that's allowing that. The tiled roofs also need to breathe, so it's not really a good idea to paint tiled roofs with full waterproofing. I know it seems like a tempting solution, but then there is a need for that breathing as part of the design. When you've got sort of corrugated or RBR roofs, steel roofs, you're then looking at the screw holes or the nail holes, making sure that those aren't sort of open for water to drip into. So that's my big one, is the water damage is severe when it happens. So preventative maintenance around water elements is so important. Coming through into your property, generally the geysers in the roof, make sure that the geyser trays are empty. There's no bird nests or rodent nests that have been built into those trays, because the potential incident there is if the geyser bursts, that water's going to go into the tray. If there's a bird nest or a rodent's nest in there, that's going to block the exit hole. And what then happens is, instead of the water flowing out of your geyser tray in a controlled manner into the drainage system, it is then blocking the drainage system, overflowing the tray, overflowing onto the ceilings, eventually then damaging the ceilings. Ceilings will eventually collapse, damaging floors inside the building. So make sure those geyser trays are empty, okay, are clear. No technicians have left cabling or sort of rubbish, cardboard cartons or anything in those trays. Double check it, make sure they're empty. There's some great solutions around geyser trays where you can actually get sensors that you can put into those trays, and those can alert you to any leaks that happen on your geyser. So obviously when there's moisture in that tray, the sensor will then pick it up and it will automatically send you a prompt to your cell phone app. So that's a nice solution that you can look into as an installation solution there. Coming down obviously into your property, again, damp becomes an issue around the property. So trying to make sure that there's good ventilation through the property. Winter is a big problem around that, where our tenants tend to close up all the windows, especially in bathrooms, and that then creates high moisture inside the property, which then allows for mildew to thrive. So for me, it's how do you make sure that there is ventilation in the property that your tenants can't prevent? So things like air bricks in the tops of the walls, those are important. Go and do an inspection. Make sure that tenants haven't stuck paper or sticky tape or newspapers over those vents, because that's going to affect your maintenance. You have to deal with the mildew buildup. Tenant now complaining about the mildew. So make sure those are clear. Bathrooms, if you can, put extractor fans in that turn on with the lights. That way, if they don't open the windows, that extractor fan is pulling out any of that damp air after a shower or a bath. So that's a solution in that situation. Yeah, and then again, you're looking at your paint on the walls, you're looking at plug points where a lot of handprints end up building up there, making sure your tenant knows to keep those clean. And then it's the high traffic areas, as far as like walls being touched. It might make sense every couple of years to give those a good wash, or give them a fresh coat of paint with like a semi-sheen paint that's easy to wash in the future. Stay away from your matte finish paints because they attract dirt and hold dirt quite a lot. And then they're obviously harder to wash. Okay, and then obviously you're looking at windows, making sure that latches are working, making sure that they are able to open and close. The hinges are in good condition. Hinges haven't rusted, haven't broken, screws aren't falling out. Because the last thing you need is someone to open a window and the window itself falls out, hits someone who's below, or obviously the idea of it damaging it, breaking it further is not really an ideal situation. Okay, and then the same thing with doors, making sure the doors are working properly and the hinges are all in good order. Often with the hinges, over time, they'll wear through, so there might be an occasion where you need to replace hinges. That's where the doors start to drag on the floor. So instead of it damaging your floors, you replace the hinge to a new tighter hinge, and then that should eradicate the need for you to replace flooring in the future. Okay, and then as you move outside the building, obviously it's the external paint that also operates as a waterproof barrier. So make sure that the paint isn't flaking on the outside of your buildings. Again, that's an eyesore, so it reduces your opportunity for good rent. But the more important thing from a maintenance perspective is those elements of cracking walls, peeling paint are an opportunity for water to penetrate your building, which will cause further damage down the line. So make sure that the paint on the outside is fully coated, there's no cracks, and that reduces your other issues as a consequence of water getting into the building. And then as you come away from the building, obviously it's looking at the flooring. Is there sand that's been heaped up against the building above the damp-proof line? You need to try and get that away from the building. Often what will happen is you end up doing some kind of landscaping. The gardeners aren't thinking the same way as you are from a maintenance perspective, and they end up sloping the ground towards the building or heaping sand against the building. So you want to remove that sand from the building, any sand that's above the damp-proof course. So if you look down the outside of the building, there's generally a little bit of a black plastic bead that's poking out between the lower brickwork, and that's your damp-proof course. You don't want any soil or ground to be above that. It all needs to be below that because that's preventing the water from penetrating up into the walls and creating rising damp. Okay, and in the same line with that soil, it should be sloped away from the building. So when you're doing the renovations of the building and your major landscaping, make sure that your soil is sloping away from the building so the water can then run away from the building. It's not running towards the building, standing against the building. You're trying to get rid of any puddling water against the building, because that water soaks into the foundation, into the brickwork. It then starts to create that rising damp issue. So remove water from contacting your building for longer than is necessary. Looking at downpipes, the same thing. Do your downpipes then flow into a soakaway that's away from the building, or is it then directed into the stormwater drain so it's away from the building? You don't want a situation where downpipes are just exiting right at the foot of the foundation and soaking into your foundation. You want that water to move away from your foundations. Okay, and then obviously your landscaping is very important. Your driveways, your parking areas. Have a look at that. What kind of update is needed to make it look fresh, new, and more enticing for a higher quality of tenant? Okay, so those are the major things from when I'm thinking from the top to the bottom. It's also a good opportunity now to look at things like your efficiencies on electricity, your efficiencies on water management. So your utility side of things. Do you need to change lighting from halogen, incandescent globes, those sort of things, to LED globes, where those spotlights or lightings are using a lot less electricity? Sometimes 10 globes on an LED would be the same as one of the old style globes. So there's good opportunity to save money from a consumption perspective. Again, you're looking after your tenants as your ultimate client, so you want to have the right stuff in place to try and reduce the consumption of the property. And then likewise on the water side, are there any dripping taps? Are there toilets that need new cistern flush mechanisms or maintenance to that, so there's no leaking toilets? You're looking at those sort of elements. For me, obviously from SAPIN-Prepaid perspective, I find that it's so good to install prepaid meters for both electricity and water, because it puts the management of those utility usage or consumption into the tenant's perspective. If a tenant knows what they're paying up front and they realize that there's a wastage, they are very quick and eager to get hold of you to say, hey, listen, your tap is leaking, please come in and repair it. Versus someone who's paying at the end of the month or receiving a bill at the end of the month, they suddenly go, oh, I'm not paying this high water bill because you didn't fix the tap. So it just changes their programming when it's in a prepaid situation versus a postpaid invoice at the end of the month. So I really do recommend looking at how you can budget towards prepaid meters as your properties grow, because that really does make a huge difference from a tenant's perspective of how they look after your property around the utilities. Thank you very much for joining us today. We'll see you again in 2 weeks' time.